Now we are going to have our final sprint. This is going to be a panel. In fact, that's not a sprint. It's about why live ops is not a sprint, indeed. But it's the final talk that we're going to have. I'm going to ask the panelists to come on and join me. In the meantime, I'm going to try and remind myself what the questions I was going to ask, because I had all this prepared, obviously. So let's see, have we got everybody on board? Not quite yet. I think we've got a few more people to come. So how are we doing today? Nice to see you again, Crystin, and Wouter, how's things? So as people come on board, Antanina, cool, we're getting there now. Cool. So let's start off. Wouter, do you want to explain who you are, what you do, and what your role is in live ops?
I guess I'll go first.
Yes, please. Yes.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Wouter, and for some of you that might be a little difficult to pronounce, so let's keep it at W. I work at GamePoint, and we've been around for over 15 years with one of our flagship games, GamePoint Bingo. I'm currently the live op manager. It's a relatively new role. However, we've done live operations throughout community events for years and years and years. And for us, live ops is a marriage between community management, marketing, the game team from Bingo, and live ops. So that's a short introduction.
Short but sweet and to the point. Perfect. So, Crystin, we've already had you talk, but if you could just get, for those people who maybe, shame on them if they did, but for those people who may have missed your talk, could you just explain yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I'm Crystin Cox. I'm the Director of Live Operations for Xbox Game Studios Publishing. I've been there for about 18 months. Before that, I've been in games for about 17 years, mostly as a designer and a game director working in live games, largely PC focused like MMOs and AAA and AA.
Cool. Thank you very much. Antanina, could you explain your background, please?
Yeah, so hello everyone, my name is Antanina. So I'm currently working as a senior live ops specialist in Activision, and actually I'm among a group of super talented people who run day-to-day operations and driving engagement to Call of Duty Mobile. Basically do everything for live ops, and starting from, design to design of the events, right, then to implementation and like future readjustment if needed. So bunch of stuff.
Thank you very much. I'm going to butcher everyone's name. So anyway, Jerry, can you explain who you are and what you do, please?
Yes, so I'm Xavier Carrillo Costa. I'm the CEO and founder of Digital Legend. I've been 20 years in the industry. We do a console quality game for mobile. We have right now 3 games live. Respawnable, which is a cartoon shooter that has been live for 7 years, and we passed 7 million downloads. Afterpulse, which is a realistic tactical shooter, we've been live for 4 years with over 17 million downloads. And we just launched Respawnable Heroes, which is a team-based hero action games.
I hadn't realized it was 7 years. That makes me feel very old. I remember when it was launched. Anyway, so moving on from that, let's start off with some sort of meatier questions. So how do we define live ops? In particular, the key characteristics which drive the way you think about it. So Wouter, could you start with that one?
Sure. So like I said, for us, live ops is relatively new in this context. And so it's only focused on GamePoint Bingo for the moment. We have other games, but let's get this off the ground first. For us, what's important is that it tweaks the settings of any build that's currently live. So that means for us that upcoming features are not handled by us. They will be handled by us as soon as they are in the live build. This has several reasons. One of the reasons is that you don't want to let your player update every single time you have an event running. Especially for us, we have multiple events in a week. That means multiple updates in a week, and that's not optimal. Other than that, for live ops, is also we think of, run, and analyze the events that we do. So we optimize them for ourselves, but also definitely for the players. And last thing is that we can steer the ship if certain metrics are underperforming. That's basically it.
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of putting everything on a server I can that can be configured, so I don't have to update anything. But yeah, I get your pain entirely. So, Kristen, I mean, I imagine you're similar in terms of like that. What's your key kind of characteristic of how you think about live ops and what drives your way of thinking?
I'll give you the definition we generally give our developers when we start working with them, which is live ops is everything that we do to make your game successful after players are inside of it. And that doesn't mean it starts after we launch the game, right? Usually, that means everything from what is your retention and progression design look like, which can happen all the way in the concept phase of the game, your community management, it's part, maybe acquisition to be in there. Our relationship with our developers is actually pretty bespoke. Like it's pretty unique for every single developer because a lot of it really depends on the specific needs of the game. Like it's quite different if we're talking about what's going to make a game successful. If it's an episodic story game versus what's going to make a game successful if it's a PvP shooter. Like team-based shooter. So it can be pretty different from game to game, but like what we say is just we're going to figure out what is going to make your game have the most success after it's live. That could be a lot of design consultancy. It could be mostly focused on analytics. It could be mostly focused on tech, but it really just depends for the game.
Oh, totally makes sense to me. And for Activision's point of view, so how would you answer that question, Antanina?
I would say, as Chris said, so it's not just a discrete tool or or a team. It's actually an essential part of your business of how do you manage player life cycle from the discovery, right, to through to churn, and basically for live ops, I think the most essential thing is to keep players engaged. And so that's why, it's like the game is always running, right? And so live ops is also never sleep. So it's like, it's not 9-to-5 job, right? So it's like, you follow the player all the time and you provide the constant engagement so that, the players are still playing in your game. And I would say, to me, I usually put three major pillars of live ops. It's basically operations, analytics, and planning. And then there is a combination and there's a loop that we're working in, basically from designing the event, implementing that, then analyzing that, make adjustments if needed, right? And then again, redesigning that and providing new content. And so for us, we also have something running all the time, and it's a constant loop. It's a constant job at work, and so it's like continuous cycle, I would say.
Yeah, I think Zoe Williams, who was the person who kicked off the track, did a fantastic kind of diagram showing that kind of loop mindset. I'm a massive believer in loops and processes, and particularly kind of like how do you empower putting the audience at the heart of that decision-making process. So seeing what they do, why they do it, and listening to them as you move on. So Xavier,
Yeah, so I agree a lot of things that have been said before. I think that really the game starts with live ops. So the day you publish the game, it's because you've thought of a game, you've thought of people reacting or playing in a way or engaging, and then you discover through live ops that it might be completely different. Things that you thought going to work is not working. Other things are just crazy about that. So it's a mix of a lot of things. It's about, I think, keep the game fresh, entertaining, engagement, as you say. And so it will be bringing features, content, map, themes, event. And we were talking about monitoring, adjusting, evolving. I think there is a lot of evolution. You need to evolve with the people. But, the players will want something of your game, not necessarily maybe what you thought at the beginning.
Well, actually, I'm going to chuck something at you there because I think you've got me thinking, and I'm wondering if launch is the point where that starts. I actually wonder if that actually starts earlier. I mean, the moment you get your first players, your kind of closed beta players, is that a point where it starts, or is it later on?
Yeah, no, I mean, it starts. I mean, you have to prepare the live ops before launching. It was easy. In fact, it's starting when you have first contact with the players.
Yeah. And
of course, soft launch or the worldwide, but it's definitely there.
And we all know no plan survives contact with the enemy. Sorry, not enemy, players. Sorry, yes. So if you don't mind, I'll follow that one through. So, but if we talk about that from your point of view, where does it start for you in terms of that experience? I mean, what is that moment where you've got to think about how you're going to engage with your players and take the data from them?
That's tricky because in our case, Bingo is already 15 years old. So we slowly but surely tagged it on. It started with the one thing we have which really differentiates us is that we have live chat, which gives you an enormous opportunity to talk and engage with your players from a community standpoint, from a support standpoint. So we did loads of interaction events with players. That doesn't cost you any development time. And you get a bond with your players and they keep coming back and they keep coming back. So that's part number one. And what we do now is we build features year over year that we keep coming back. We let them recur so that at some point players just realize, oh, we have this event and they've done this for 3 years, not constantly, but spaced them out. And I know what it is and I don't need to be briefed about how it works and what it does. So for me, it's adding on stuff to your current game, which I really like because there's so much to do and so much to discover. Even if you think you have it all, there's something new that will pop up.
I think that makes sense, and actually, it shows that there's a kind of there's an ideal situation where if you were starting from scratch, you would do all these things in a nice processed way. But actually, when you come across a game that maybe you've already got out, that maybe already has some small lever like chat, that you can actually build on that and actually find a whole way of building an operational experience around the where you find those levers of retention. Does that make sense?
I would also say, because actually, so our game, right? So we just launched in October last year, and I would say if you plan to have the live ops operations in your game, right? So live operations in your game, so you need to actually plan it in advance when you're developing the game, right? So you need to provide essential tools for live ops, basically, to put all the events, all the engagement events, monetization events, right, into the game. Because otherwise, it can be they can be a cool team. But if we don't have the actual tools not to interrupt, or not to provide the constant updates, that's also what Wouter mentioned, not to constantly update the game, but actually do it live, right? And so not interrupt the player's experience. So that's something that you have to plan in advance before even launching the game. So that's something, at least, from my experience,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think it is feasible to add it later, but it's so much more expensive. It's so much more difficult. And actually, you're going to compromise things that already exist, and then you run the risk of breaking them. So I think retrospectively fitting it in is very difficult. But if you don't plan for that early on, you're going to have to rely on what you've got and make sure that does work. And like you say, you might end up having to update the game. And the number of times where I've seen people having to sort of back channel. But I mean, I think that life's a lot easier nowadays. I think, Crystin, with the sort of tools that you guys are working with, and people like the Chili Connect guys, and there are several other providers. But more importantly, I think that model now where there is a back end solution available for the team that doesn't necessarily have to be developed by the game company. From your point of view, Crystin, has that actually kind of profoundly changed the way people work?
I would say yes. I mean, I think it's opened up a lot of doors for developers, and we focus a lot on the way that it opens up doors for indies who wouldn't necessarily have access to building those kinds of tools themselves. But I will say a lot of my work, I also see how much it can help out an established team who's just never done live ops before. Because it can be quite a shift for a team to go, okay, I need to add all of these things. I now need to have a bunch of server programmers, and I need new kinds of tools, and I need new kinds of monitoring. It can really help to have an attitude, which I think the game industry in general is getting a little better at, accepting the benefit of middleware, and not having the attitude of, if it's not built here, then we don't want to use it. And we're starting to see more and more those tools come up. When I work with developers, it can be an incredible relief when we say, you don't have to build, a telemetry pipeline from scratch.
Yeah.
Like, oh, good. I don't even know how to start thinking about building a telemetry pipeline from scratch. That's a real relief. And it can help them focus on the things that they really need to focus on that we can't build middleware for, which a lot of it is the design of the game, the community management. While community tools can be incredibly powerful, you got to have that effort that it takes for a human being to be out there and really working with your community. And then actually doing the work of, as we're talking about live events, of actually running the events and then doing the analysis, figuring out what is and isn't working, and then making updates to it. And if the team is spending all of its time, building out just a pipeline to look at the data, it's hard to get the resources to look at the data.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. And I think that for me, when I get a person running a game, I want the live ops admin guy to be sitting there with, this is a configuration file I'm going to use today. That's going to activate the event, the activity that's going to happen. Oh, by the way, here's the asset, the GIF or animated image or whatever it might be that I'm going to then put into these channels. And I want to make their job easy. I want to make their jobs trivial so they can focus on responding to what players say and want and do, and then get the data to come out for me without having to build it.
And I think that also we have to think about longevity.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is something that I'm sure W's feeling this pretty keenly with a game that's 15 years old. And I know, like, I've worked on games that had quite a long lifespan. And I think I just frightened somebody once. They're asking about server configs. And I said, oh, one of the games I worked on previously, we regularly had about 4,000 active server configs at a time for the game that we were managing. And they're like, wow, how does that happen? Well, the way that happens is you run the game for 10 years and it all builds up. And I do think one of the things that can really help with that is trying to go to tools that are designed from the beginning to think about how is this going to be managed long term. When it's not super feasible all the time for a game development team, we can ask them, we can say, can you please think about how this data is going to be managed in 10 years? But that's actually quite difficult for a team to do, even in the best of circumstances.
I think it's impossible. I mean, the number of times I've ended up having to redesign some back-end platform element because, well, okay, admittedly, most of the stuff I was doing was like way before there were external tools. But now I've got situations where I've got games that I haven't even launched yet that I've got to re-engineer because the platform is changed. It's got bought by somebody and they're going to change it. So anyway, that's another subject. So Xavier, I'm going to stick to you now. I mean, in terms of, so does this sound familiar? I mean, in terms of this whole idea of like making sure you got the tools ready before you went live. Did you guys have everything you needed when you first launched?
No.
I knew you'd say that.
In fact, when we launched our first, Respondable, our expectation was it would last, 1 year, 2 years max. So we discovered, we discovered an incredible engaged community. And then, so it was pushing us to keep the game alive and to keep feeding the game. And so we had to build everything on top. So that was a little bit complicated. But when we started the other game, we spent an important amount of time with the tools. Yeah. In fact, we built the tools and we're using some publisher tools, but we built a lot of tools. We wanted to move a lot of things to server, be able to control everything from the server. So that was a kind of changed mentality. But we realized that, if you need to act quick, if there is a mistake in the game, if you were wrong with the price, because one thing in live ops is everything happens very fast. So if you screw up, it's going to blow up really, really fast. So you need to be able to react super fast. And so it's that dynamic. So you need tools and you need to be able to change things. And you have to monitor all the time because if not, you can have really bad surprises.
Yeah, totally agree. So for me, I think the heart and soul of what makes live ops work in terms of building more things for more people to do more often and keep them playing longer, all this scalable stuff starts with an event. And obviously different games have different definitions of what that is. What is an event for you?
I can start with that.
Oh yeah,
so,
that's fine. We lost you there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We generally, divide our events into like engagement events and monetization events. So basically, engagement are working towards, keep players, provide something for like free-to-play players and someone who doesn't want to, maybe buy anything, right? But just wants to enjoy new modes, new maps, or something, right? New content in the game. And then monetization events, they're purely like for sales, basically. And so that's how we actually divide them and think of them as events.
Personally, I separate those out. I think I consider promotions to be a very powerful activity, but I tend to try and focus on to support a retention event. But again, I suppose this is the difference: is every game has their own particular needs. I mean, from a bingo point of view, and what is an event something specific, or is there some variety to that?
Oh, we definitely have variety. What we tend to do is we have 3 timelines working together. So we have a big overall event that lasts for, let's say, a month, which is fully themed and there's activities going on. So that's timeline number 1. And then we have the community events supporting that. That's a layer beneath it. It can be anything. It could be actually related to that event, but it could also be something, I don't know, a live Q&A session with video, all kinds of things. And then the third layer that we have, that is monetization, which, as you said before, ideally you combine with all the others. So we have 3 different streams, and even though the Ghostbusters said we shouldn't do it, they cross.
Cross the streams, exactly.
Yep.
I think that's a really nice way. But I mean, I look for kind of like a daily and a weekly and a monthly cadence, not always necessarily literally, but I think that's a nice way of framing it. And I kind of like the idea of using kind of daily being something that's configurable, like a particular target score or a bonus for a certain type of activity. With weekly, I'm tending to look at things like how do I fit content into that? And for monthly, I'm looking at either themes or kind of like real world activities, or maybe I'm looking at features. I mean, so it does depend on the game. It does depend on what I'm trying to achieve. So for you, Crystin, is like how do you see teams using this kind of event-based kind of mindset and managing the kind of game that way?
Well, I think that what you guys have said already is very true, and it speaks to a lot of the way that structure is ideally happening with a live ops team. One additional lens I try to give to my teams is that I think an event should ideally create shared history with the community.
Yeah.
So this is kind of an element that I think is super important to community formation is shared history, something that we can look back and talk about and say, hey, remember when this thing happened on Halloween? Remember when this thing happened, when the balance update happened? Those are super important. So try to like add that element when we're doing our planning to say, hey, remember, is this going to be something that players can attach to? Because the one danger, and I think it happens to every single team, is eventually your designers and your planners get a little burnt out and it can start to become mechanical because you are on a schedule and it never ends for you, right? For you, it's a marathon. And so trying to bring that back in can help sort of center us. The other thing I will say, go ahead.
No, go it's fine.
No, yeah. So I do want to bring up, there's one other type of event that I don't see a lot of games do anymore, but used to be really common more in the early days of live ops, pre sort of mobile, the sort of mobile explosion, which is the dynamic event that is triggered just through the use of sort of GM abilities or the sort of use of commands in a game. I still think that actually has a pretty powerful place. I know it can be tough for games to write those tools, but it's still something that I've used in a lot of my games. And I do think there's something really fantastic about that. It's awesome. And I think you always want to have the stuff that you guys are talking about where you plan out, a daily, a weekly, a monthly, you've got a cadence, you know how it's all going to wrap together. But I think there is something really great about building those tools in to let your game masters or your community managers or your producers or the person who wears all those hats if you're a small team to get into the game and just trigger something.
You're taking me right back to the early days, like 98 dial-up modem-based platform where we had game pros, or we had like community managers, community deputies, all of whom were volunteers in that era. Right. And it was amazing what people did spontaneously. In fact, actually, one of the things that reminds me of is that sometimes the events don't have to be driven by us, they can be driven by the community. And I remember one of the most profound moments, one of the first earliest profound moments that really changed my thinking in communities was when someone unfortunately died in a road accident. And they were a key part of the Air Attack community, which was a game at the time that was quite big on Wireplay. We had this fly past. Somebody had changed the map, not us. They said, can we do this? So, yeah, sure. They changed the map. They put a gravestone with his name on, and then they did a fly past. And I had it was an incredibly tear-jerking moment because, we had 150 people playing in a game which could probably take about 20 in theory. And somehow we managed to get 150 people coming in and doing a fly past for this guy who most of them only knew through playing the game. And yes, the scales nowadays are vastly bigger, but a genuine human moment happened. And that audience, that community wanted to share their personal shared grief in a way that was profoundly more important than the game itself.
And I do think that that's incredibly important to think about, right? Is why do players want events from you? Right? What are they getting? It's easy to fall. I mean, it's always easy to fall into like, well, this is going to hit these KPIs for us, and it's it's going to drive this monetization and this login frequency, but also asking, like, what are players getting out of this? And a lot of it is that desire for something that's a little bit more handcrafted, like a little bit, it feels a little more personal.
So I'm not expecting you to have a grief-ridden story. That way, I went into a dark place there. But I mean, what do events mean to you? And then, do you see any of these kind of more personalized experiences?
So we have, as W said before, we have different layers of event, and I think the biggest one goes from 1 to 2 months, so they're big event, and they're somehow related to a season, real season, and we fake some of them. So it's important, but the consumption partner of people is, okay, summer, you do summer, and Christmas, you have to do Christmas. So on the shooter game, it's a little bit complicated, but you do that, and then you have, of course, Halloween, and you got Chinese New Year. So this is kind of structuring a little bit the year, and in between, we invent our own events. Yeah. We have those. And then from a year to another, the ones that people liked, we keep them. So now the people remembering, oh, this month is, whatever, atom weapon. But it's incredible to see how that works. So at the beginning, it was complicated. We say, okay, how do we do, a Christmas with shooter? And then we had a paratrooper Santa Claus, and it was pretty fun. So it was cartoony, and it worked really well. So, and then each year we're changing colors, it sounds stupid, but people are collecting them. So so you have things like that. And then of course we have like, each of those events have like weekly objectives. So they're events in the event. So so that people have the kind of progression from 1 to 2 months, depending on the game. And then of course we have some daily and weekly activities, and we have also a community event, but that's a little bit how we are structuring.
So just to follow that through, I mean, again, to a certain extent, to what Crystin was talking about earlier, how do you sustain that kind of that engagement? I mean, how do you build the balance between innovation and predictability?
It's I think you need it's a lot about I would say the POs and the community managers. So it's so community manager, they're getting a lot of feedback, they're talking a lot, and so we're seeing what people like or not, and then a PO try to bring things in a very fresh way. I think they're really enjoying what they're doing, and so they put a lot of passion into that. And we've seen that the more passion we put into one event, the more it works. So attention to details. Some event doesn't work, but people really love when something is well prepared, and so we're really doing super cool stuff. And it's been a long, 7 years. It's been very long. So sometimes you have to kind of change the team as well, because it gets complicated. No more ideas, but honestly, people are very creative, and so we give them a lot of freedom sometimes to do like crazy things.
Yeah, we're doing a trick at the moment where our design team are basically taking 2 hours out every other week just to look at other people's games. and to not just like play them, but also try to come up with new games that are unrelated to what their day jobs are. And we're finding that 2 hours of just mucking about with ideas has been a real improvement, because it stops them just thinking about the train lines that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. So, Antanina, from your point of view, what do you guys do to keep kind of like the creativity, or is the game still relatively fresh and you haven't got to that rut yet?
Even though it's fresh, right, we still have to provide always something new, right, to our players. And basically, when I was mentioning, that we divide our events into like, engagement and monetization ones, right? So of course there are like cross a lot, right? And also like among those events, there are like multiple layers that you guys were mentioned to. And so recently, like we actually came to the cadence of like themed seasons lasting for like about 2 months. And so that's why we're trying to build our content around those updates and those seasons. And we're also targeting mostly like themed, so that actually players know which, I don't know, era they are right now, like what heroes they can expect or something, right? And so it's actually kind of exciting. And I would say when we're planning the events, we're also asking ourselves, what is the business rationale for what we do? So for every single thing, basically, is it like targeting to increase the hours that players, or like matches that players play in the game, or is it targeting like bringing, I don't know, more increase the retention, for example, right, or something like that, or like increase the awareness, for example, of the players. And so we also work closely with the community management team and also track what people are saying, right? So I would say it's a in terms of success and also the business rationale here, we kind of try to make our decisions based on data, on the community feedback, right? And some like a few other external factors, basically. Yeah.
But even those things can be, it can be specific, can't they? Because it might be, retention one day, but it might be, we want more people to try this particular activity out. And that's a perfectly valid approach, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We want to draw focus, for example, to this or that stuff, right? So, and it's also something that we can plan where we're going to promote it in the game, for example, right? So which placement we're going to choose for that activity, right? And what is important then. Absolutely. So it's actually, so it's kind of also part of the planning, I would say.
Absolutely. Cool. So from your point of view, obviously bingo is bingo is bingo is bingo. How do you instill a kind of like this unpredictability, this kind of spontaneity that we've been talking about?
We tend to run events for a couple of times and then just leave them be for a while. We iterate on events, and I think, like Antanina also says, is like you have different events for different goals. Yes. So we want to spend, we want more retention. We want more played minutes. We want to move the economy. Either we inject more or we remove more. And some of the events do multiple things, but we have specific events for specific targets, which by now are easily executed because we document pretty well what they do and which settings. So we can have, we had last week that we wanted to do an event. We had a 9 a.m. meeting and it was live at 12.
Wow. That's pretty impressive.
That works because we know all people involved already worked there for a long time. Yeah, so you can.
But in some ways, it's a little bit like a kind of modern version of the GM intervention that Crystin was talking about. That you guys had the ability and the power to do it, and it was a configuration, presumably, to make that happen.
But also communication and everything included. And what Crystin says about being the GM, we also do that. We tend to go into rooms and say, hey, let's have a little party here. Just you, 100 people, they're now in our room. You're lucky to run into me. Let's have a party in here. And it works wonders.
Great. I mean, I love all that kind of stuff. Actually, one thing I remember when I turned up when I was identified as being the head of whatever it was I was running at the time, when I turned up, people loved it. They just that. I mean, I'm nobody. Just the fact that I happened to be, like product owner of XYZ, was just delightful that somebody on the team turned up in the game.
It's really important also for bonding with your players. And another thing is, what is really important is that people don't expect a company to have a face. So we also have player days in the office, and I've had times that people say, you know what? I knew you guys were along for a really long time, that you exist for 10, 15 years, but I always thought it was somebody in his attic doing everything. Well, we have an entire office with over 100 people in there, but still the people are truly thinking like it's somebody in the attic.
Yeah. So, Crystin, I mean, does this all resonate with you? This, you know, the innovation, because you've got so much experience. You know, it feels to me like it's always been the case that we've had to separate ourselves from our day job and come back in and really focus in, as Antanina and Wouter were saying, on the specific outcomes that we're trying to achieve, and using those constraints to try and inspire us for new things. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a real balancing act. You know, a lot of times talking to teams that are making the transition, I also warn that it's quite a different thing to run a game for the third or fourth year, or even into the first year, than it is to work on a game that's in pre-release. And so you have to be, you hope you're excited. They're excited about like doing this new thing and learning these new skills, but it is a different set of skills. And it's a real balancing act between trying to stay focused and have those goals that you're going for, so that you're not just running off in a million different directions with no focus, and you're actually doing something with purpose. And then also trying to keep things fresh and interesting and feel a little bit more personal. My advice to teams is always, especially if they're new to this, set a schedule and have that be the predictability that you start with. Like, okay, we promise we're going to ship some new events are going to start at the beginning of every month, right? We know, you know, day one of the month, that's the day when the events are going to start. And then we can be very flexible on what those events are to start with. And then that gives you a stake in the ground to be like, well, we know we can be at least this predictable. And then you start to find out what your community wants to do, because of course, like routine and ritual, also very important to community formation. There's going to be things they want to see over and over again. And it can sometimes feel counterintuitive. I mean, Xavier's talking about Santa Clauses, parachuting in and things like that. It's okay to be silly sometimes. And then you also got to know that might create this idea in people's minds, like, oh yes, it's December, that means the Santa Clauses are coming. Yeah. And that's actually quite important to a community to have that to look forward to. But then you have to tweak it a little bit, and that's where it can really be hard for teams. And so you do have to balance them by, I think Antanina was saying, really giving them a purpose to help focus them in, to say, how are we going to tweak this? Well, this month we're really focused on early game or onboarding or retention. So that can help really figure out what it is you're going to do to tweak that.
No, absolutely. We have a question which I'm going to, we're almost out of time. I'm going to ask this question because I don't want to make sure that I'm not the only one asking them. So much else I wanted to ask. I'm going to start with Xavier. The question is from Kagate. I'm probably got that wrong as well, but hey, they want to know how you segment for events. Do you use levels? Do you use country tiers? Maybe an event specifically for a specific country or specific occasions? So how would you break down an event like that?
So in terms of content, we've been doing a lot of local content. And what we're doing is we're bringing that globally. So if we do Chinese New Year, it's all over. If we do Cinco de Mayo, it's all over. So because at the end, they become very global. So we're not targeting, we thought, of course, if you do Chinese New Year, it's probably targeting more, China. But at the end, it's working for everyone. So what we do are segmenting players with the offers, what you're offering, the type of package, for example. Because if you are a player that are new or not spending a lot, if we're offering you package which are too expensive with a lot of good stuff, they would never spend that, whatever you do. So it will be very frustrating. So we try to hide that to them and spend more affordable package. That is what they're looking for. On the opposite, for whales, what they want is high package, high value. So we try to segment more by type of consumer than with that per country.
Yeah, I think that's why I like to separate promotions from events, precisely for that reason, because often you need to target those things differently. So, Antanina, are you seeing the same sort of thing? I mean, are you focusing on events being global and kind of promotions being specifically targeted, or do you try to tier them in different layers?
I would say in terms of the segmentation, right? So that was in the question. So I would say all of the above, right? But I can agree with Xavier. That's something that we do locally, right? So we also extend it to global, especially right now, with this like era of globalization, right? So players actually, they know already about like holidays that happen somewhere else in the world, right? So probably, yes, the promotion will be more focused in this specific region, for example, but the content will be available everywhere. Maybe like name something different, but it's anyway, it's going to be everywhere. For maybe for some of the events, like for segmentation, it's hard to say that we're actually targeting specific. Maybe only like new players and current players. That's like basic segmentation for that. But I would say it's also it's more for the analytics then, to see like how the segments actually correlate and how their behavior changes across the segments. But it's really hard to predict from the very beginning, but you can kind of like target more or less. And same for like promotions across the countries, basically.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it was interesting with PlayStation Home that Japan wanted to have its own content, but increasingly Europe and the US decided that was completely a waste of time for them anyway. And actually, they shared their content pipeline, and as a result, they then they were able to share their event pipeline, and then they were able to get more value from that process. So I'm totally with you. So I'm going to go for Wouter next. I mean, so for yourselves, I mean, are you segmenting your events?
Yes. So the big global one that lasts for a couple of months is basically segmented by player behavior, as in how much time do you spend, how do you move the economy, and slightly a little bit monetization. Monetization is also segmented separately. So what happens is that if we run an event and you tend to spend 10 minutes with us, I'm not going to ask you to execute the same goals or reach the same goals as somebody who spends 2 hours with us, because or if you're on the level, that also doesn't make sense. Hi, welcome to this new game that you're playing. Here's the level 50 boss. Enjoy. That's not working. So so that's what we do. And the local events, so we also segment per geo. That tends to be in the community pipeline. So for instance, upcoming is 14 Juillet, that's a French holiday. It will only be communicated to the French, but it's in line with the bigger event. So that's basically how we segment.
Cool. So Crystin, from your point of view, you've seen so many different things. What would you say is the best practice when it comes down to the segmentation?
I'll give you my short sort of cop-out answer, which it really depends on what result you're trying to drive.
Depends. Whoa,
I know, it's terrible. But actually, I think it is useful to think about that. Like, if you're trying to drive better onboarding, then yes, you'd probably need to segment this out by, player experience. If you're trying to drive retention, you also, as W was saying, really may need to segregate this out by how much time players are generally spending, what their session links are, what kind of engagement they have, so that you don't burn them out. It really depends what you're trying to drive. If you're trying to drive, a feel-good community event, a lot of times you would sort of throw it open and then just look at the segmentation later to see how everybody responded to it. So I know it depends, but it does depend. I mean, I think that's true for most segmentation. I get a lot of questions. How should I segment this? How should I segment that? I would say the best advice is follow the logic. What are you trying to get out of the event? What are you trying to measure? And then follow that from there.
No, I'm totally with you. I think, segmentation can be really powerful. But I think it's about understanding why you're doing it. Again, it's, what is in it for the players, and, whether it's about getting them to aspire to what they could do when they eventually get to the stage where they can actually beat that big level 50 boss. That's actually okay to have an event that does that.
Right.
Provided its context is clear, and you're not just making it so you're hiding things that people can't do, and making it an unpleasant experience. So as a constraint, as a way of providing texture and innovation and ways of separating out possibilities, great. But if we just stick by segmentation for segmentation's sake, we can just waste a lot of effort and time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so unique. Like the only universal segment I know of is the golden cohort. Everything else is game specific.
First time someone said that today. I'm glad.
Really?
Yeah. No one said the golden cohort to me today, so I'm very happy you pulled that off. I think you win buzzword bingo for that one. Yay! So on that note, I think we're over time. I just want to give you a chance to say one more thing each. What's the one piece of advice you'd give people so that they realise, how they could get through the marathon rather than, just burn out? So, Wouter, you start with you. What's the one piece of advice to stop people from burning out?
Don't go into the game machine. No, just kidding. No, just kidding. Set limits for yourself within reason, of course, and make sure that you're not the only person who can execute a job. Make sure that there's fallback people. That applies to implementing everything, but also play well with others, involve other departments, share your insights, share your knowledge. You never know who might say, like, hey, I want to help you out with what you're doing. So basically that, keep the dialogue open with all departments at all times.
That's great. Thank you for that. Crystin?
I guess it would be set expectations. Set expectations in your community, set expectations in your team. Try to think that through and just set expectations, whether that is deciding what outcome you want from the event beforehand and what your targets are going to be, or having a proactive dialogue with your community about what they can expect from you and how often they're going to get updates from you. I think that's a really valuable thing to do across the board.
Antanina?
I would say, probably short, because, it's the craziest job ever. And, like you mentioned, it's a marathon. It is a marathon. So I would say, make sure you don't burn your content and make sure you don't burn out your team. So that's the most important, I would say, like that. Provide them with all the essential tools, like make sure that the team is actually scalable, and they're all working, understanding what's the scope that is required, to make things done. Provide them with a good work environment, some fun always, because I think that's the most important, that, like whatever you do, you should always have fun, because we provide fun to people.
We're selling fun, so we're not enjoying it. We're doing something wrong, aren't we? Xavier?
Yeah, so I think to keep the game very long time, it's about passion, I was mentioning before, because of course you need analytics, you need focus, you need metrics, but if you forget about passion, if you have passionate people, they will do great things for the game. They need all the rest. And the other thing is bring new talent. We've seen that, it's incredible, because they come with super fresh ideas. They think differently. You need people with energy. So we're bringing new talent, people with a lot of, ambition, energy, and they love the game. And of course, they're supervised by more senior people, but those guys are really, really pushing the limits. And they're coming with new things that you would never thought.
Absolutely, totally agree. I mean, I'm going to chuck my one in. Predictability beats size. If I can release something regularly, predictably, trustworthily, it doesn't have to be big. And I think that's the thing I learned most. It's like, it doesn't have to be big every time. So you don't have to kill yourself with every release. Something which you can look forward to and know is going to come and be trusted is key. And the nice thing about that is, as a designer, I don't have to kill my darlings anymore. I just defer them to the next release. And you have no idea how much that saves my sanity. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you for my amazing panel. You've been absolutely fantastic, and lovely seeing you all. And again, thanks for taking part in this.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.